any pronouns. It's the start of a brand new year, the perfect time to look back to the past and discuss media that could be gone forever. In the past few years, I've become incredibly fascinated by lost media and the searches they garner. It's strange, humbling, and even terrifying to think about how many works of art that once existed have not been experienced for a long, long time, and may never be again. Maybe things you remember watching as a child are no longer available. A movie that was once a box office hit and able to be viewed again. A book with no known copy still existing. It evokes a lot of emotions, including curiosity. For those that don't know, lost media is basically what it sounds like. Pieces of media, such as songs, commercials, books, movie scenes never released, and so much more, that are not available for the public to view. Some media was destroyed, either purposefully, such as Nazi book burnings, or accidentally. Think MGM's Vault Fire. Some of the only copies misplaced. Some works finished but never released, such as many various TV pilots. Some media is just kept from the public by whoever owns it for whatever reason. Think the Disney Vault. And then there are works whose companies shut down, and now the whereabouts of these works are just missing. There are plenty of ways for media to become lost, and as such, plenty of lost media, including plenty of lost horror media. In honor of the new year, I thought we could take a look at some different lost horror movies from around the world. And we can respect the history of horror while keeping the memory, and maybe even the searches for these movies, alive. Let's start in Mexico, with a mysterious movie from 1994 called El Alimento del Miedo, or The Food of Fear. It was directed by Juan López Moctezuma, famous for other Mexican films such as Mansion of Madness and Alucarda. El Alimento del Miedo was his last film before his death in 1995. From what I can find, it was only shown once in 2006 at the Macabo Horror Film Festival. It doesn't even have an official poster, and the only images of the movie we have come from an interview with the co-writer of the movie, Jorge Victoria. An interview which I cannot find any English subtitles or transcripts of, unfortunately, and with my remedial Spanish skills, I can't translate much myself. Really, not much is known about this film. We do have a synopsis which is confusing. Taken from the Lost Media Wiki, the film takes place in an underclass neighborhood in Mexico City when a troupe featuring a circus act, led by Don Ramon, Lopez Moctezuma himself. He and his wife Petra, Zora Espinosa, have to take care of the daughter of a neighbor named Flea who has been jailed for drug trafficking. Petra thinks that Flea must earn a living, despite her being 5 years old, entrusting her several domestic tasks. The little girl later befriends Pepito, who works as a clown on the street. Complications arise when a person with satanic tendencies arrives at Ramon's house and develops a romantic interest in Petra. A fight between the three adults causes Flea to suffer a fatal accident. So as not to get into any problems with the authorities, Petra uses Flea's flesh to make tamales that she sells on the streets. There's a small write-up on Cineteca Nacional for the 2006 showing. Thankfully, this one is a little easier to translate. Finally, the posthumous film by Mexican filmmaker Juan López Moctezuma arrives on the scene of Macabro. In this way, the doubt of what was considered only a legend is cleared up, to actually find one of the most interesting and autobiographical films by the author of Alucarda regarding a notorious case of a red note in Mexico City, that of the killer Tamalera. The killer Tamalera, or La Tamalera Asesina, refers to an apparent real-life case from 1971. Fed up with an abusive husband, Maria Trinidad Ramirez killed him and used at least partial remains for the tamales she sold. So a bit different from the synopsis we have. I'm not sure what's meant by the autobiographical part. That could be a translation error, or maybe something that's explained in a Spanish source I just don't have access to. There's not much else to say on El Alimento del Miedo. We know it was shown at least once, so in the 2000s the film's whereabouts were known, though not widely available. The few photos we have give us a glimpse to what the movie looks like. There have been a few people around the internet claiming they have a copy, but since none has actually popped up, these are likely false leads. I did see someone claim Cineteca Nacional might have a copy still. However, as of right now, that's unconfirmed, and I'm not sure if anyone has reached out to them about it. Since it was screened over a decade after the director's death, there is hope one day El Alimento del Miedo will be made available to the public. Until then, it is considered lost. For the second Lost movie, let's move north, up to Canada, with a film called Amanita Pestilens. According to the Lost Media Wiki, the plot concerns a Montreal resident who develops a strange obsession with a strange, seemingly indestructible fungus that is rapidly destroying his previously perfectly maintained lawn. Released in 1963, it's actually a very notable film. Not only was it Canada's first color film, it was the first Canadian production shot twice, once in French and once English, using the same cast. Unfortunately, none of that stopped it from being a commercial failure. It never got any video release, but it was screened at the Berlin International Film Festival. It even appeared once on the MoviePix channel in 1998. There are also reports of it being broadcasted on West and East German television, but I'm not sure on the dates or how many airings there were. I also found it was screened at the International Film Festival of Ottawa. However, once again I could not find the exact dates when this occurred. There may have also been a virtual screening around the same time as well. Amanita Pestilens seems to have been more available than the previous film ever was, but it's still very limited in its releases. Outside of these few screenings and broadcasts, it's remained obscure, surprising due to its cinematic importance. In my research, I did come across this fun little TV program guide write-up for when it aired on MoviePix. See the mushrooms grow! If you have access to the MoviePix cable channel, you should make a point of staying home this Sunday, May 10, to watch a rarely seen Canadian gem, Amanita Pestilens, 1962, airing at 9 p.m. It's possible to tape The X-Files and see it later, you know. Amanita Pestilens, directed by René Bonnier and introducing a very young Geneviève Bujold to the world, is the blackest of tales, telling the story of what happens when a man is obsessed with his suburban lawn, sees his masterpiece of greenery and trimmed edges suffer an infestation of poisonous fungi. Don't miss it. It's funny, and it's a fine time capsule. Even if we don't have access to the movie itself, it is nice to have this small piece of history. Something else interesting that I stumbled on was the Letterboxd page for Amanita Pestilens. There are a few reviews, all pretty positive, but one sticks out. This review by Dustin Declos mentions, "It has never been released on any home video format. The only way to watch it, to my knowledge, is to request a viewing copy at the Library and Archives of Canada in Ottawa, Ontario, which unfortunately is a deteriorated VHS that looks like it was made in the 80s. It's in desperate need of a new digital transfer." If this is accurate, that's pretty amazing. That means there is hope of this being more widely available. If nothing else, it gives us reassurance that the film isn't completely lost like so many others. Of course, the review does mention the poor quality of the VHS, which is a shame. Still, it's a good lead to look into if anyone in Canada is interested. I'm a huge fan of Freaky Fungi Fried, so I'd love for this one to eventually be found and made available. You'd think with how much importance it has to Canadian cinema, it'd be better preserved and made public. Maybe there is a good quality master cut of it somewhere, just waiting to be remembered by the right people who can do something with it. And we can only hope. Let's go overseas to Britain now and take a look at the early British horror film Castle Sinister, all the way back from 1932. Castle Sinister is one of the earliest British sound horror movies and one of the earliest examples of the mad scientist trope we all know today. It's even more lost than the previous films we've talked about, as nothing survives from it. No promotional material, no poster, no trailers, no stills. All we have are a couple of reviews from the time. Proof that talking about a piece of media can keep it alive, even if there's nothing else of it. A synopsis from the Kinetograph Weekly gives us this explanation of what the movie was about. Ronald Kemp, visiting a remote castle, is pressed by his host, a professor, to stay the night. In the course of it, Ronald meets Jean, who entreats upon him to help her father, who is kept under the observation by the professor. This intercourse is watched by an ape-like monster who jealously attacks Ronald. Jean summons the professor to help. Instead, he threatens to use Jean for his experiments in brain grafting. The monster then attacks and kills the professor. Jean's father is freed, and she and Ronald join him in leaving Castle Sinister. It sounds run-of-the-mill nowadays, and even bears resemblance to The Man Who Changed His Mind, featuring Boris Karloff about another mad doctor doing human-ape transplants. However, that movie came out a few years later in 1936. It may have been a quota quickie, a B-movie made literally to fill a quota put in place by the Cinematograph Films Act of 1927, which declared that by 1936 20% of all films shown in any cinema had to be British. But that doesn't mean it wasn't important to cinematic history. A lot of horror fans and cinema historians want this film. The British Film Institute even labeled it one of the 75 most wanted films. Sadly, unlike the other films we've talked about so far, this one has a very low chance of ever being found in any capacity. We're seriously lucky to even have these few reviews proving that at one point, Castle Sinister did exist. Even though it's lost, the effects of it can be seen through the horror movies that came after. Here's one from Germany that's much better known than the previous movies. 1920's Der Januskopf, translated to The Head of Janus. It was a silent film directed by F.W. Murnau, who you might recognize as the director of Nosferatu 2 years later. Much like that film, it was based off a book, in this case, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Also, much like Nosferatu, they didn't bother to acquire the rights for adaptation. It's believed to have been a very loose adaptation, with the doctor using a cursed statue to transform instead of a potion. It starred Conrad Veidt, who played Caesar in The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and even had Bela Lugosi, albeit in a minor role, apparently as the doctor's butler. Reviews at the time were incredibly positive, praising the film's suspense and masterful performances. Some even said Veidt's performance outdid his one in Caligari. It's even thought that Der Januskopf was one of the earliest instances of a moving camera shot in cinematic history. Between the cast, the innovation, and the intrigue, this is a movie that is highly desired. I've heard there might still be a surviving script, but can't confirm 100%. I did stumble on a message board talking about one. The conversation involves William M.K., also known as Bill Koffenberger, who worked on Becoming Dracula, the early years of Bela Lugosi. A user, Russ McGee 1977, says, I started by contacting several archives in Germany and learned that the Kinematics Janowitz collection has a copy of the script for internal working purposes. I was able to trace the original script back to the archive in France. So, it is possible the script does in fact exist, and maybe one day we can have access to that. Nosferatu was ordered to have every copy of it destroyed. We are very lucky that one copy was saved and that we can still view the movie today. Der Januskopf, however, did not face such legal issues. In fact, at the time there were several film adaptations of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde that the Stevensons estate did not seem to mind. Yet Der Januskopf is now lost, with little hope of being found. Not no hope, however. Yes, the chances are slim, but films of this era have been found before. Just last year in 2022, The Net, a silent film from 1916, 4 years before Der Januskopf, was found in the Norwegian National Library. And though it is a century old, it was found in near pristine condition. There is hope one day audiences will once again see The Head of Janus. Finally, let's make our way over to the United States for the oldest lost movie on the list, The Werewolf from 1913. Everyone knows the Universal monsters. Count Dracula, played by Bela Lugosi. Claude Rains as the Invisible Man. Lon Chaney Jr.'s depiction of the Wolfman. Before any of them was Phyllis Gordon, who played the titular werewolf in the very first of Universal's monsters. Phyllis Gordon played Rotuma, a Navajo woman who shapeshifted into a werewolf for revenge against the ghost of the man who killed her boyfriend 100 years prior. It's based off a short tale by Henry Bergrand called The Werewolves, published in 1898. There's really no telling how similar the two may have been. This movie sounds like a blast, honestly. Probably not the most culturally sensitive towards indigenous cultures, as it was 1913, but certainly entertaining. Not only was it Universal's first of the monsters, but widely believed to be the first feature film about a werewolf. All around, this is another cinematically important movie that we have no access to today. In 1924, there was a fire at Universal. It was neither the first nor the last of devastating fires that destroyed countless historical examples of early cinema. It was an all-too-common fate that makes you appreciate any film we have before the 1950s. The Werewolf was one of these casualties. This is probably the movie on the list that I want the most. Unfortunate, since it has the actual least chance of being recovered. The studio fires were devastating in the early decades of cinema, and claimed so many films we just will not be able to see ever again. Maybe, by some amazing stroke of luck, some forgotten reel was shipped somewhere else, forgotten about for over a century, and will one day be recovered. If that does happen, we can assume the quality will be not the best. Film deteriorates. It's delicate. And frankly, most people, if they were to stumble on this, probably wouldn't even know the amazing bit of history they found. And, well, chances are good it would just be scrapped. No matter what way you look at it, it's tragic to think about the werewolf's fate. We do have an image from the movie taken from an old copy of the magazine, the Universal Weekly at least. It's not much, but it's something to show this movie existed. And at least now, it can still exist in our imaginations. I wanted to leave on more than just a hopeful note, but a note of proof. Lost media can be found. In fact, it's found all the time. While I was working on this script, in fact, 2 movies I was going to discuss were rediscovered. The first is from South Korea, Space Monster Wangmagwi. It's a kaiju film from 1967, and the oldest surviving giant monster film made in South Korea. It's famous for having the most extras of any film, with roughly 157,000. For a while it was considered partially lost, as it was sort of around, occasionally being seen at film festivals in South Korea, but not made widely available. That all changed in June of 2022, when SRS Cinema announced that they had gotten the North American rights to Space Monster Wangmagwi, then officially releasing it on Blu-ray here in January. I, for one, cannot wait to get a copy and watch this piece of cinematic history. Our second piece of found media is a little strange. In 1965, the Japanese film Kairan Semushi Otoku was released by Toei. A year later, in 1966, it was picked up for distribution by an Italian company called Filmar. They, of course, dubbed it in Italian, reportedly keeping that dub pretty faithful, minus a few name changes and giving the cast and crew English pseudonyms. The dub was available for years. What was lost was the original Japanese audio. Until just weeks ago, when on January 10th of 2023, the original Japanese version was given a home media release. I couldn't find any fanfare or big announcements about it from the distributors, at least in English. Just one day, plop, here's the original audio that's been missing for roughly 50 to 60 years. Lost media searches can be truly wild rides. They're mysterious, they're fascinating, they're tantalizing. More than that, they're important. Every bit of media, once lost, now found, is like a light at the end of the tunnel. Sure, we won't be able to find everything. Between wars, delicate films, studio fires, and the overall degradation of time, it's impossible. That's why we should cherish every find and every clue in the right direction. If you're curious about more lost media, I highly suggest checking out the Lost Media Wiki. It's a great place to see what's been lost, what's been found, and to find people on the search. Thanks for joining my lucid screaming.